Good afternoon and welcome to the weekly webinar series with the Kentucky Small Business Development Center. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Janet Flom with the Louisville Center, one of 10 centers throughout the Commonwealth providing service to all 120 counties. If you're not familiar with Small Business Development Centers, or SBDCs for short, then allow me just a moment to share some info about what we do. So we provide assistance to entrepreneurs just like yourself, regardless of what point you are in the life cycle of your business. So if you're just starting out, we can assist with market research, business plan development, and help you find startup capital. For existing businesses, we can assist in growing your business, whether that's hiring your first employee or finding capital to expand your operations, maybe it's a new location, or maybe you need help with cash flow or want to pivot your business like we've seen several businesses do in the past several months. And if you're ready to retire or just want to sell your business, we have folks that can help you do that as well. So our professional staff has a wide array of knowledge and experience in various industries. It really allows us to provide a customized service for your particular business needs. We do all this at no cost to you, thanks to the U.S. Small Business Administration co-sponsoring our program, which is administered then by the University of Kentucky. And they then partner with regional universities, community colleges, and other local economic development agencies. We're part of a national network, as you see on the screen, America's Small Business Development Centers. And that means there's a small business development center to serve every business owner in every county across the U.S. To learn more about us, you can visit kybizhelp.com. There you'll find additional resources to help start, fund, and grow your business. You'll also find the socials we're on, so find your favorite and connect to stay up to date on news, events, and services. To request personal assistance, you can go ahead and email us at info@kybizhelp.com or call our hotline at 1-888-475-7232. A recording of today's webinar will be emailed to you later this afternoon. So if you have trouble with the audio or if you just need to step away, know that you'll have access to the entire recording. Moderating today's event is my fellow staff person from Louisville Center, Dave Etkin, our director. Good afternoon, Dave.
Hey, Janet. How's it going today?
It's going good for a Wednesday, starting to warm up out there.
All right. So I'd like to welcome everybody to our weekly Wednesday webinar, and thanks so much for joining us. So again, I'm Dave Etkin. I'm the director here at the Louisville Small Business Development Center. And, over these last few weeks, we've been getting tons of questions about these EIDL loans that are now coming back. For the last several weeks, the SBA has only been taking applications for agricultural-based businesses, but last Tuesday, I think, they've reopened the portal for regular small businesses. So with the number of questions we've been getting, we really needed some answers. So to clear things up, I've invited Kathy Cook, who is the Public Affairs Specialist for the U.S. Small Business Administration's Office of Disaster Assistance. And Kathy's been with the SBA for over 30 years, and she's been involved with, I bet, every major disaster in the states east of the Mississippi River. And also, Kathy has been inducted into the International Women in Homeland Security and Emergency Management Hall of Fame for her leadership and innovation in the field of emergency management. So if there's a question you have about your EIDL loan or applying for an EIDL loan, please place that in the chat, and then we'll get those to the end. And right now, let's introduce Kathy and hear what she has to say today. Hey, Kathy.
Afternoon, Dave.
So glad you can make it today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and just as your introduction went, the small business development centers have been vital toward the application process for the economic injury disaster loans for the COVID-19. And your partnership always in disasters is welcome, but especially during this particular disaster declaration. So I'm happy to come aboard, and hopefully we can help resolve some of the questions and issues that people have.
Great. Thank you so much. Kevin, want to put up her slide there? We'll just get going, right, Kathy?
Great. Right now, as David said, the portal is open. So any type of small business or small agricultural cooperative or nonprofit organization and agriculture businesses can apply for a low interest economic injury disaster loan for the COVID. The process allows you not only to apply for working capital funds, but it allows you to apply for what we call an emergency advance. And those are forgivable loans based on the number of employees you have. It is not necessary for your loan to be approved for you to qualify for the advance. However, if you're interested in the economic injury disaster loan for working capital, it is necessary for you to understand the process and your reconsideration rights. When the application is first submitted to our system, the system is so sophisticated that it can pull a credit bureau report. And I'm going to use the analogy of going down a road and having 10 lights. And every light is green. And then when we come upon an issue and the light turns red, then that's when we have a decline decision. And that's when, in order to get the economic injury disaster loan, we have to ask for reconsideration. So the first thing that happens with every application is credit is pulled. If the credit score is below the SBA standards, then the loan will be declined based on what we would call unsatisfactory credit. I cannot give you the minimum credit score because that is proprietary. But what I can say is no does not necessarily mean no and no way. What you need to do is write an explanation of your credit issues and send a copy of your last year's federal tax return, an IRS Form 4506T, and we will reconsider your request for an economic injury disaster loan. Acceptable reasons just depend on how the credit became delinquent. For instance, if you had a medical problem and your credit was delinquent because of that, if you had a partner in the business that stole the business out from under you, or whatever the circumstances are, go ahead and explain it. All it takes is time. There's no cost to apply. There's no cost to reconsider your loan application. But if you don't try, then you're definitely not going to be eligible for an approval. Another reason that you might be declined for a loan is called economic injury not substantiated. You will not believe how many people rushed through the streamlined application and didn't really realize what numbers and information they were putting into the system. The system asks for the gross sales for the 12 months preceding the disaster. That means 12 months before the disaster incident. That equates to January 31st, 2020. So we're asking for the gross sales for the business prior to January 31st, 2020. Then we also ask for the cost of goods sold for the 12 months prior to the disaster, which again are January 31st, 2020. If, for instance, you put 0 sales and you put cost of goods sold $50,000, then what SBA does is says this business was not sound before the COVID-19 declaration. We ask for the historical sales because we don't base the ability to repay or the working capital needs based on what happened after the coronavirus. We want to base it on what a normal year looks like, because no matter what your sales are, you probably still have either a mortgage payment or lease payment or rent, whichever you want to call it. You probably still have payments on inventory, machinery and equipment, utilities, payroll, all of these things don't necessarily stop just because you are closed or doing less sales than normal. So when this occurs, when we have the numbers inverted or we have numbers that really represent what has happened to the business after the coronavirus or COVID-19 occurred, then that's why we would say the economic injury is not substantiated. And you go, well, that's ridiculous. Every business had some problem because of COVID-19. Well, we're basing it on the information provided in the streamlined application. So in this case, the business owner has the right to ask for reconsideration. It must be in writing, and a good idea is to submit the last year's tax returns and the IRS Form 4506. We will look at the last year tax return and use those numbers to establish what the working capital needs of the business are. Another reason that might be declined is called character reasons. And the third bullet says not eligible due to character reasons. There were several questions on the streamlined application that asked if you had been involved in a riot or a civil disorder, if you have been arrested or convicted of a crime other than a minor motor vehicle violation, questions such as that. If you answered in the affirmative, then SBA must investigate the reason for either your incarceration, your arrest, your sentence, your probation. We need to know more about it. And there's a particular form that SBA will send you. It's called a Statement of Personal History, SBA Form 912, in which you'll put your name, address, social security number, your addresses for the past 10 years, and give us explanation of the arrest, incarceration, or probation. Depending on what the crime was and how serious it was, we may be able to waive that and say, okay, it was 10 years ago, it wasn't a serious crime, and we can proceed with the application. But until we get that form and until we know the details of the offense, we cannot approve the loan. So again, a written request asking for reconsideration, providing the information regarding the character issue, and it's always good to provide last year's tax return and IRS Form 4506T. Sometimes applicants have applied for both the economic injury disaster loan in advance, as well as the Paycheck Protection Program, otherwise known as the PPP. Occasionally, the PPP loan has been deemed sufficient enough for the business, and they no longer want the economic injury disaster loan. Or the person wants the advance, which is a forgivable loan with no repayment, and they do not want the economic injury disaster loan working capital. So in those cases, the applicant can just withdraw the application and say, I'm no longer interested. We will still write a letter and give you up to 6 months to change your mind. So you don't have to worry about that. If something happens later on and you decide to pursue the economic injury disaster loan, that's fine. You would still be eligible for the advance. Another reason is if the business is not a small business. In the economic injury disaster loan for the COVID-19, we streamlined a lot of processes. Normally, when you apply for an EIDL, economic injury disaster loan, we require that you provide copies of your tax returns, balance sheet, profit and loss, monthly sales, personal financial statements for the principal, tax returns for the principal, schedule of liabilities. With the streamlined application for the economic injury disaster loan for COVID-19, all we're basing your ability to repay on is credit. And we're moving through the questions on the application to see if you meet the criteria, rather than having each business have to provide their in North American Industrial Classification System code and looking up the maximum amount of sales that that business can have, or the maximum number of employees that that business can have and still be considered a small business. For the EIDLs for COVID-19, or using a 500 employee baseline. So if your business has 500 or less employees, we consider you a small business. However, if you have more than 500 employees, then you must look at the SBA table to see what industry classification you have and look at either the revenue or the number of employees that would make you eligible to qualify as a small business. Generally, manufacturing concerns are based on the number of employees. Sales are based on the revenue. So if we have, in the loan application, we ask you what the business industry is, and we ask you what the business activity is. And if you're not meeting the 500 or less employees, then we have to look up to see if your application and your business qualifies as a small business. If it doesn't, then you would be declined for that reason. Okay, so right now we've gone down the street and we have 5 different red lights. The next one is a significant credit situation. If on the credit bureau or through some other mechanism we find out that the principals of the company have delinquent child support, more than 2 months delinquent, then the application will be declined. Again, the applicant can ask for reconsideration. It can, depending on what type of business it is, the person that had the delinquent child support can show us that they have brought it current, or they can divest themselves of that business, or they can appeal the decision with whatever documentation they have. If it was, let's say there's a junior and a senior and the information was put on the wrong credit report, we'll look at whatever evidence the business wanted to provide to help overcome the reasons for decline. Then we come down to another stoplight. Business activity is not eligible. What that means is there are certain businesses that by law are not eligible to receive economic injury disaster loans. At the very beginning of the economic injury disaster loan for COVID-19, faith-based organizations were not eligible for economic injury disaster loans, but they changed the law for COVID-19 only, and now churches and other religious organizations can apply and get working capital loans. Another change in the law was to allow agriculture-related businesses or agriculture businesses to apply. And this again is only for the COVID-19. Some businesses that are still on the list that cannot apply would be speculative activities, would be gambling concerns when more than 1/3 of the revenue is earned by gambling. Lobbyists are not eligible. Congressional congressmen or congresswomen are not eligible to apply. So there are still some industries that did not get changed, and that cause us to say that the business activity is not eligible. Lending institutions are not eligible. What we're doing is through reading all of the responses to the questions in the streamlined application, we're making decisions. As soon as we find that there is an issue, then the loan is declined for us to get more information. The business activity, we've had people put in there that they are financial institutions, but they're really stockbroker, or they're not really lending, but they selected the type of industry from a list, a drop-down list, and the type of business activity from a drop-down box. So the reason I'm telling you this is because even though the applicant may have gotten a decline, it's based on the streamlined application information, which is not always providing enough detail for us to take another look at it. And the last reason that you may get a decline letter for a business applicant is called unverifiable information. This is probably the most confusing because the SBA letter does not detail exactly what is needed. When an applicant is not a U.S. citizen, they may still apply for an economic injury disaster loan. But what we need to be able to approve that application is proof that that non-U.S. citizen is here legally. So a permanent resident card would be a reason to reconsider the application. So we've had applicants that will call us, and then we would have them send the resident card in with a request for reconsideration. And again, we think it's a good idea to always provide a copy of the last year's tax return and the IRS Form 4506T. Another type of unverifiable information is the time when the individual puts zeros or did not include any amount for the gross sales prior to 12 months prior to the disaster, or the cost of goods sold prior to the disaster. Or in the case of agriculture or nonprofit, did not provide their operating expenses for the past 12 months. So in the absence of information, they will get declined. And then once again, if they provide a copy of their tax return, a written request for reconsideration, and the IRS Form 4506T, that would be a good reason to demonstrate that there's new information and to reconsider the application. Another big issue is regarding the bank account. I can't tell you how many hundreds of applications that we have that we are unable to disperse funds or process because the banking information is incorrect. We recently sent out an email to all of the applicants that did not receive their advance, and we asked them to go and complete the application again and make the corrections to the information in the application. A lot of people did not realize that the account number for the ACH might be, or the routing number for the ACH might be different than the routing number on the checking account. They did not realize that their bank name had changed. They just looked at the check, they put down SunTrust, they didn't put Truist, and that was a flaw. Another reason is when they put the applicant's name, it needs to be the legal name of the business. The legal name of the business is not matching the name on the bank account. That presented another problem. There are also some banks that will not share information. That would be another reason for a decline. Our system is so sophisticated, this new processing system, that it actually goes out and it pulls the credit. It goes out, checks the bank account information. It goes out and checks for a business license. It goes and validates phone numbers. It validates addresses. It does a lot of information to verify and validate a lot of the information that we have, because we're not asking for financial documents and other things in the streamlined application. So if you have a situation where you haven't gotten any funds, then most likely when you call our customer service center, you'll find that the banking information was wrong. And the best way to correct that is to provide a voided check. Again, it has to be attached with a reconsideration request. The reconsideration request must be in writing. The applicant cannot just call and say, I want to be reconsidered, and here's my application number, and here's my bank number, or here's my figures for gross sales prior to the disaster. We have to have a written request, and the file will stay in the reconsideration department until somebody in that group reviews the information and determines that we have what we need to overcome the reason for the decline and puts it back in the system. The applicant does not have to fill out another application. As a matter of fact, if there are two applications with the same information on it or some of the same information on it, one of them will be identified as a duplication, and no action will happen on that file. We have had several cases where somebody has put in their EIN number and it matches another applicant. They had no idea, but the other applicant is asking for the status of their application. And then when we look carefully at the other file that's matched to it, we see they're different states, they're different entities, they're different primary contacts, but they've got the same EIN. And then we would ask for verification of the EIN numbers from each of the applicants in order to make the correction. So there's all kinds of situations that are causing the loans to be declined. And most of them are just from the speed at which applicants or their CPA or their accountant or whoever prepared the application in the system for them just made these errors. We have in, I think it's Ohio, there is a CPA, and she works with a group of Spanish-speaking business owners. And in every single file, she put her name and her personal or business email in for all the applicants. And so the system flagged it. Why do we have 36 files with all this lady's name in it, and she is not a part of any of the business? She did not pay attention to what it was asking for. The streamlined application has a specific section for somebody to put their information if they prepare the file, such as the SBDC counselor, and then afterward you can put yes or no. Yes, you represent the applicant and should be called for any decisions on the loan, or no, you just filled out the application and you do not need to be called, which is what the SBDC counselors are checking. So many of these errors are happening because just fast-paced want to get the application in. These are the most common reasons for a delay in having a decision. And if I had to pick one out of the whole list, it would be the unverifiable information, and mainly the banking information is just not right. The account number's wrong, the routing number's wrong, or the name of the business used in applying on the application does not match the name in the checking account. So we have to be very, very concerned with this. When the applicant is declined for any of these reasons, we will send them a letter. And in the letter, it will give one of these reasons as the decline reason, and it will state that the applicant has up to 6 months to ask for reconsideration. It will give them 3 choices of how to send the reconsideration request. They can mail it to our processing and disbursement office in Fort Worth, Texas. They can fax it in, and it provides the fax number, or they can email it. I would not recommend anybody snail mail any information. Currently, the volume of applications is in the millions, and any paperwork that comes to the processing office may have a higher percentage of getting misplaced than any other time we processed disaster loans. So I would recommend either faxing or emailing the request. I think I've covered this particular part very well. At the bottom of this slide, there are 2 things. There is one, an URL, covid19relief.sba.gov. As we said at the beginning, the portal for economic injury disaster loans for COVID-19 and the advance is open to all small businesses and nonprofit organizations, including the faith-based organizations and the agriculture businesses. So if you have not applied, or you have a fellow business owner that have not applied, then now is the time. We have a specific amount of funding. We don't know when the funding will expire. We don't know if we will get another stimulus bill after this. So it is worked on a first come, first served basis. And they're worked in turn. If you had provided a paper loan application, or you applied early in March or the beginning of April when we were processing using another system, and your loan application started with a 2, we would have asked the business owner to reapply using the streamlined process, and their application should start with a 3. If this person didn't know to reapply, we will tell them to go back into the portal and apply, and we will give that application the same date as their original application. So they won't have lost their place in line. So the bottom URL is how to apply for the economic injury disaster loan for COVID-19 and the advance. You cannot just apply for the advance. You have to go through the entire application. And after you get the advance, you can say you don't want the economic injury disaster loan. If the business applicant has questions on how to complete the application or the status of their loan, they can call SBA's Customer Service Center at 800-659-2955. And with that, I'm very interested to know what questions you may have.
That was great, Kathy. We've got a ton of questions. Number one, we've got a couple of questions on, you mentioned, I think you mentioned this, but let's clear this up a little bit. There's PPP sunsets on June 30th. You can't apply. There's no set date on EIDL loans. Is that correct?
December 31st, 2020, or when the funds exhaust.
Okay. All right. And then I've got a couple questions. We've got several people ask a ton of questions, but so here's a question from Sherry Hurley. Hey, Sherry, how you doing? Is the EIDL loan a forgivable one?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Is the EIDL loan a forgivable loan?
It is not. The economic injury disaster loan is not forgivable. There's a component when you apply for the economic injury disaster loan for COVID-19 that if you answered yes when you were filling out the application, yes, that you want the advance is a forgivable loan. It is based $1,000 per employee and to a maximum of $10,000. So if you have 10 or more employees, the most you can get is $10,000. That's the only component. Disaster loans by law, unless they change it, are not forgivable.
Okay. So she also received a PPP loan early on, and she has will be spent that here in about a week. And she's also just got notification that she's going to be awarded the EIDL loan. Can she spend her EIDL loan proceeds on things that the PPP had already been spent on going forward, such as rent, utilities, and payroll? And do the funds have to be spent during a certain time frame, like the PPP loan?
Kathy, you're going to have to turn your audio back off of mute. I muted you to try to fix the audio issues that we're having.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. It is very, very difficult to tell you yes and no regarding this question. The rules regarding the PPP funds are the same as the economic injury disaster loan funds in that they cannot duplicate each other, meaning most of the PPP loan is for payroll, and you should not use the EIDL, economic injury disaster loan, for COVID-19 also for payroll. And we're recommending that even bank accounts be created for each one so that there's no problem in saying that there wasn't a duplication. However, I realized that we didn't think that the COVID situation would continue. And initially, the PPP was activated for a couple of months to help you with paying the rent or the mortgage interest or a few things like that. And now we're in a period of time where a lot of the PPP money has exhausted. I don't have a good way to tell you how to keep the money separate, but other than 2 bank accounts, but you're just going to have to somehow show that the PPP money was used for this month, say March, April, May, and the EIDL money for rent came from the EIDL funds, and that was June, July, August. You just have to be very, very careful, because a duplication of benefits will cost you, in the long run, the ability to have a forgivable PPP loan.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Janet, you got a question?
Yes, I'm aware of the sound issues we're going to have, so I'm going to try to do this, go through here. But also know, Kathy, that there might be some questions that we come across that you may have already addressed. So it might be a repeat of already what you've shared. The first is about the nonprofits. So if there's someone that has a smaller and only smaller nonprofit, only depend on individual donations, there's not a consistent amount of donations. So do they qualify for the loan program?
If they are an existing nonprofit, they qualify. Whether they are supposed to show whatever their income was for the year prior to the disaster and their operating expenses. So it's not unusual to have a nonprofit in that situation.
Okay.
You know, they should look at their tax return before they try to make the application and use the figures that are on the tax return to have a successful application.
Okay. And from our Bluegrass office, Becky asked, regarding nonprofits, who is then responsible or liable for the loan?
That's a great question. All right. Initially, the system requires somebody, and usually the organization picks a board member to be the primary contact for the nonprofit. And we require credit to be pulled on every single loan application. So we're going to do a hard pull on whoever is the primary contact. Loans over $200,000 require personal guarantees. Loans under $200,000 do not require personal guarantees. Loans over $25,000 require collateral. For the COVID-19 economic injury disaster loans only, SBA is not requiring any real estate as collateral. Instead, what we are requiring is the business assets. And what I mean by that is inventory, furniture and fixtures, machinery and equipment, notes receivable, any type of assets that the business has that's not real estate. We're not going to take specific things, but for those of you who don't know what a uniform commercial code filing is, it's called a UCC1. It's similar to if you borrowed against a new vehicle. They have a lien on your car until you pay it off. Well, it's kind of the same thing SBA does. Matter of fact, SBA will take $100 out of the loan amount if it's over $25,000, and we will file the UCC with the courthouse for you. And again, it's just a blanket lien that says if you don't pay in the event of default, then SBA would look for machinery and equipment, inventory, whatever assets the business has, but no real estate and no personal guarantees are required under $200,000. Thank you.
Speaking of that, Kathy, I had a medium-sized hospitality business apply, and they were told that the loan proceeds were now capped at $150,000. Have you come across that?
Currently, we have a limited budget of funds, and so there may be some limitations on the loan amounts to help us ensure that we can help as many businesses as possible. So if that's the amount that business qualifies for, then that's what we're giving them. But again, we are working as hard and fast as we can to make sure that everybody in need, businesses, nonprofits, get some funds.
Also, in the loan documents, there are restrictions on distributions to owners, especially if it's an S corp. And I think this is a concern because owners often have to rely on distributions from an S corp to pay their taxes owed in their business. Are those distributions allowed?
Okay. The distributions to board members, principals, payments to owners, all those things is prohibited. However, if the individual entity wants to have that waived or they want to have it crafted in a certain way, then they can write a letter to SBA and we will take a look at amending the language in the loan authorization agreement. For those of you who haven't had an approval yet, the loan authorization agreement is kind of like a contract between the SBA and the applicant business. And it tells everything, how you're supposed to spend the money, what the terms of the loan are, all the rules and regulations. So you look at that document, and again, if there's something in there that you question, write a letter to our legal department and ask for them to consider reading it, amending it, or what have you.
Okay. Janet, you got a question?
I think I'm going to step out just for a second because I have dogs that are barking like crazy. I'm sorry.
All right.
They
Well,
must know I have a cat.
Well, let me ask a question from Priscilla. And I'm going to read this for you. So,
Okay.
and I think this is the loan doc language, but it says, borrower will promptly notify SBA of the existence and status of any claim or application for such other compensation and of the receipt of any such compensation. And the borrower will promptly submit the proceeds of the same, not exceeding the outstanding balance of this loan to the SBA. And so she's applied to the state of Kentucky for a grant of $1,000, but she hadn't received it yet. But if she's approved for this, so she has to give that to the SBA.
The answer to that is probably. Again, the loans are designed to help alleviate the working capital needs. And if you get money for the same purpose as the loan, then we consider it a duplication of benefits. However, if we look at the application and we see that you can demonstrate, maybe you put less sales and less cost of goods sold, and you send in your tax return, and you would have been eligible for a higher loan amount, then there's no duplication. You just got a lower loan amount, and you would be able to keep the $1,000 grant.
Gotcha. So, as far as the use of funds, can, as a single proprietor, can she use those funds to pay herself as well as a business account?
The funds, the way that they use the proceeds, that's the paragraph in the loan authorization and agreement. The way it reads is the funds are for working capital to alleviate the economic injury that occurred as a result of the COVID-19 that began in January 31st, 2020. So if you would normally, as a business owner, pay yourself, pay your mortgage, you would pay for inventory, you pay utilities, all of those things. That's what the money is for. It is not to enrich you. And what I mean by that is we've had a lot of people that say, well, your loan has less interest than the loan I have at the bank. So I'd just like to pay off that 3-year note that I have. We can't do that. You cannot refinance long-term debt because our interest rate is less than the other. What it's for is the ordinary and necessary operating expenses that the business could have paid or would have paid had the disaster not occurred. That's the best way to think about it.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Here's a question from Andrea, and she says, if you've had to put your business on hold since all this happened, does that pose a problem when the system look for signs of business activity when she applies now?
Well, a lot of businesses are closed because of mandatory, restrictions in the area. So we understand that regardless of whether the sales are less or whether the business is closed, the business usually has expenses that are payable and due. And we don't want the business, when they reopen, to have the delinquency be evicted out of their leased premises, not be able to manage operations with their vendors. So we anticipate that your needs may be less because you're closed, but that you still have working capital needs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Chris wants to know, what is the method for requesting a withdrawal from the loan process?
The method is just simply to send a written request. You can email it or fax it to SBA and just say you're not interested in the loan. You really have to provide a reason, and we will handle that. You can probably also call our customer service, 800-659-2955, and they'll make a note of that. A third way is if you don't respond. If we've approved the loan, then the next thing that happens is we prepare loan closing documents. We'll send an email to the business applicant saying, come to the portal and sign your loan closing documents. And if they're not signed in a week, we'll send a reminder. The next week, we'll send a reminder. Well, at the end of 60 days, we're going to withdraw the loan because lack of interest. So that action for you. But if you don't want all those reminder phone calls or emails, then having sent a letter would be a good thing.
Okay, thank you. Janet?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm back. So Larry wants to know how to tell if your EIDL amount received is a loan or an advance.
The way you can calculate it is if it's an advance, then it will be $1,000 per employee. And unless we have problems with the bank account, you get the advance relatively quickly after you have submitted the application. If we have problems with the bank account, then you won't get it until you get the loan. And so you can just base it on the number of employees. Early on, and maybe still, I'm not quite sure, SBA did not send emails notifying business owners of the advanced disbursement. So if you've made an application, watch your bank account for an entry. It'll have almost like a wire service, and it'll have SBA, and then it'll say U.S. Treasury, and it'll be $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, up to $10,000. And that will be the advance.
So Kathy, are there restrictions on the way you spend the advanced portion of the funds, just like the loan proceeds?
The advance funds are for working capital needs. And we have had some lenders on the PPP program that find out that you've got an advance, and they have assumed that you're using it for payroll, and they'll take it as a duplication of benefits. We propose that you use it for whatever is necessary. So, you can use it for payroll, realizing if you've got a PPP loan that it's a duplication, or if you use it for working capital funds, that's fine. What you can't do is just stick it in the bank and let it draw interest. Hold it for Christmas presents.
Mm-hmm. Janet?
Yes, so we do have a few folks from the Kentucky District SBA office with us today. So hello, Michael, and hello, Robert. So Robert has a question here. He says, is personal collateral, like a car, house, etc., used for the EIDL? And since it is for 30 years, will borrowers have to constantly ask for release of personal collateral from the SBA, or can they request blanket release initially?
Okay. The way the language reads is business assets, and it uses the word personal property, but what we're considering personal property is the contents that the business uses. We are not taking automobiles, we're not taking clothes, furniture, any of those things. So it's business assets. There are some lenders that want first position on business assets. And throughout the 30-year loan, there are changes that business owners want to make as well. Once we fully disperse the loan and some time passes, the loan is actually sent to a servicing office in Birmingham. And those loan officers, that staff, will make any adjustment or modification that's needed during the time, whether it's substitution of collateral, whether the business wants to relocate, whether a bank needs to have the superior collateral position. They want first place on these business assets. So we can address all of that. I'm not going to tell you that everything is always an approval. It's a case by case, but it happens all the time. So we're not going to take your car and take your baby and take your dog. But again, these are taxpayer dollars, and do your best to keep up with the payments. And the worst thing anybody can do if they're having trouble is not to call. SBA can offer additional deferments on payments throughout that 30-year loan. So let us know if you've had hardship. Let us know if you've been in a car accident or your business burnt down or whatever the situation is. Don't keep it from the lender. Thank you for that.
Thank you. So we got several questions. I think we need a little clarification on, so especially here's a good one from Rita. She says she called the SBA and was told that we could pay off bank debt as long as it existed prior to COVID-19. My understanding from this webinar is that is not true. This is correct.
Okay. There are two types of situations where you could pay it off. If the loan was acquired because of COVID-19, we would consider that an emergency or what's called a bridge loan. And so that particular debt, you absolutely could use the working capital funds to pay off because you've got that in anticipation for the economic injury disaster loan for COVID. And through no fault of your own, it took us longer to process this loan than it did to get funds at the bank. So you made a prudent decision. Mm-hmm. The other situation is if it is a short-term debt that you were going to pay off anyway. But if it is a long-term debt, which is 12 months or more, or a line of credit, absolutely don't pay it off. We've had people that have gone ahead and paid off the line of credit again because our interest is less, and then they need additional funds, and the lender wants first position in the collateral. And there's a whole bunch of situations where they have to write in, we have to agree to it, and we may not. So just do what you would have normally done as if this money from the economic injury disaster loan came in through sales. The very same thing. Pay your utilities, payroll, payments on inventory, lease payments, mortgage, whatever you would have normally done. No expansion, no relocation, no paying off long-term debt.
Janet?
So Troy asked, he said, based on your comments about some banks are considering the advance a duplicate of funds, is the EIDL loan advance deducted from the PPP forgivable amount if used for other needs besides payroll?
The PPP can only refinance the EIDL loan if it's used for the same purpose as the PPP loan. So generally speaking, they're not refinancing many of the economic injury loans. It's only when they're being told that it was used for payroll as well. And then it's rolling over to the PPP. But usually what's happening is people are getting the payroll protection or paycheck protection, program loans for payroll and using the EIDL loan for the working capital needs. They're keeping it separate.
I have Devin who's asking, how does a business owner request an application to be reconsidered?
Okay. The first thing to do is look at the letter that you received for the reasons of the decline. If it's for something like the business entity is not considered a small business, then research what your business industry is. And there's particular SBA form that you can fill out and determine the average number of employees over a certain number of years and appeal the decision with that document in ARM so that we have something to make a new decision on. That's really the key, is we're looking for more information, because the streamlined loan application asked a whole bunch of questions, but it didn't say, if you answered yes, give more details, or if you answered yes, that you're not no, you're not a U.S. citizen. It didn't tell the person, we need to get a permanent resident card. So you can provide it in writing. It can be emailed or faxed, but you want the request for reconsideration to be accompanied by the missing information or the information you think will help us make a new decision. And I suggest that you submit a copy of your last year's tax return, or if it's 2018, if that's the most recent, and an IRS form 4506. Our customer service center at 800-659-2955 can send you an email with those instructions. So if you just call and say, I need to ask for reconsideration, how do I do it? They'll give you the fax number, the email, and you'll have everything at your email to be able to send it back.
Anyone ask a couple more?
Absolutely. Let's go for it.
Yeah. I think you're getting less feedback than me, so maybe you should ask the questions.
Sorry. So what is the method for requesting a withdrawal from the loan process? Is that just a phone call?
Yeah, we want things in writing because we want to be able to verify that action to make sure that it's really the business owner and not some disgruntled person. So we prefer to have it in writing. And again, you can call 800-659-2955, and they will give you the instructions with the email and or the fax number to submit that request.
Okay. I'm trying to scroll through. There's a lot of questions, but I'm trying to
not duplicate.
Yeah.
Well, here, let me ask this question real quick. So if they've already gotten the EIDL loan, but not in advance, can they go back and request in advance?
Okay, there's two situations that we have with the advance. One, the advance did not come in advance because missing information, it mainly in the bank account. That totally stops everything. So if you got the economic disaster loan, most likely you got the advance together with that loan. So let's take into consideration a business that had 5 employees, and they were approved for an economic injury disaster loan, EIDL, for $150,000. Well, the loan part would be $145,000 and $5,000 for the advance to make up that $150,000, and it will come together to the bank account. The other situation is when the loan was declined and the person did not get an advance. We've got to correct that banking information. And what we're doing now is sending out emails telling the applicant, please go back to the portal and submit an application again. You fill it all out and make sure that the banking information is correct. And the third way is the longer way, is when they call customer service or contact us or you, and they find out that the banking information is wrong and they send a voided check. And then we would forward it to the processing office. So if you didn't get an advance and you requested it, those are the methods to get one. Now, here's the hard and the truth of the matter. If you missed, or the business applicant missed, checking the box that says, I want an advance, there is no way to go back. We
Ooh.
cannot go and check it. The system is a newly built program. It just came alive after our old system failed at the early stages of the COVID-19 disaster declaration. So there's no way to go back. If that box was not checked, then unfortunately that particular applicant will not be considered for an advance. So please make sure, if you are telling your friends or clients or neighbors or whoever, to make sure to double and triple check, so that we don't have these situations where people just skimmed over and submitted the application because of situations such as this.
And just to piggyback on that, we have a question from someone who was approved for $150,000. They took a lesser amount. Now they'd like to change their mind and maybe access more funds. Is that allowed?
Currently, we don't have a process for increasing the loans. However, you're within the right to ask for an increase. And I don't know if the system will change and allow you to get that. So I would say send in a letter requesting an increase. And if you call 800-659-2955, they will give you the information. And I would say provide, the reason you need the additional funds, the last year's tax return, and the IRS Form 4506. All of these things really go to the same email. Is P as in Paul, D as in David, C as in cat, at sba.gov. However, if you're asking for an increase, then you need to put increase in the subject line. If you're asking for the file to be withdrawn, it needs to put withdrawn in the subject line. And if you're asking for reconsideration, then you should put reconsideration. I'd rather you call customer service and get it in writing so you don't miss the email or mishear me regarding it. So that would be my best advice.
Thank you. Janet?
You can just repeat that, the CPD. I'm asking, what was that? I have someone asking.
PDC.
PDC.
PDC. Okay.
Thanks. There you go, Bridget. I do have some.
Actually, let me give you this other one that's probably a less busy email. It's PDC, okay? Processing Disbursement Center. That's what PDC stands for. So let's use PDC Recons, RECONS. PDC Recons at SBA.gov. So P is in Paul, D is in David, C, and all together, Recons, RECONS at SBA.gov. And then you go, shoot, that lady said it twice, but I missed it. Call 800-659-2955.
Great. Kevin's putting that up on the board for everybody. So
Okay.
I do have some folks that it looks like they are reconsidering applying for the first time. Can we just kind of briefly go over what they can use those funds for the EIDL?
Okay. First, I'm going to tell you, before you even go to the portal, my best advice is to have a copy of your latest tax returns. Have your checking account information handy. Have something with your EIN and SSN on it. Make sure you've got all of the source documents. And then What working capital funds are for is the ordinary and necessary operating expenses of the business. So that can include the rent or lease payment or mortgage, the payments on inventory, machinery and equipment, leasehold improvements, payroll, anything that you would have normally used the money from your sales for to operate your business. It's not for expansion. It's not to pay off long-term debt. It's not to improve things. It's to pretend as if the business was right back to the day before the coronavirus happened. What's due? What do you use the money for normally? Quarterly taxes, fine. Payroll, if you didn't get a PPP loan, fine. Again, lease payment, supplies, health insurance, any of those things that you would do as a business owner.
Thank you. Janet, you got more?
Yes. So Stuart's asking if a business has not been able to make payments on an existing note due to COVID, can the funds be used to catch those payments up?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it's for.
That's good to hear.
Folks saying that if they've used their PPP money up on payroll, can the EIDL loan then be used for additional payroll expenses?
And again, I would say yes, but you're going to have to be very, very careful with your documentation so that it is not determined to be a duplication of benefits. So you read the policies regarding the PPP. You can find it on treasury.gov/cares, CARES. You can talk to the Small Business Development Center experts. You can talk to the SBA district office. People, I just don't represent the Paycheck Protection Program. And it's very specific about not duplicating benefits. So you have to be really, really sharp and make sure that you demonstrate this was for this time and this injury continued longer and had to use this money for payroll after the PPP money was exhausted.
So Kathy, after somebody receives the loan, what type of oversight are they required, or will the SBA do? Are they required to forward documents on a regular basis to the SBA to verify expenses, or will you show up at our business to look at our books, or what happens?
After the loan is dispersed, after a particular number of months, we send the file to our servicing office in Birmingham. And they are the ones that are responsible for auditing and maintaining. So I really don't get involved in that. And there are periodic financial statements that they send out to check on you. And again, we want to be not breathing down your neck, but these are taxpayer dollars. And so we want to know if you have any issues. Don't wait to bring them to our attention, but we want to also see how you're doing so that we can keep the loans in the portfolio and keep things moving smoothly. And for those of you who hadn't applied yet, all of these particular disaster loans have been deferred so that the first payment doesn't start until 12 months from the note date. Not from the date the coronavirus ceases to be here, not from the date that we have a vaccine, not from the date of your first baby's birthday, date when your dog came out of the pound. It's 1 year from the day of the promissory note. And for those of you who are accountant types, interest accrues on the loan amount from the time it's dispersed from the Treasury. So if we disperse the funds in month 1, then it's still interest, just interest on unpaid principal, and it does accrue, and there's no prepayment penalty. You'll get a monthly billing statement every month, and until you get one, don't even think about paying off that loan or paying down the loan, because I want to make sure that your payment gets connected to the right loan number. So look for the paperwork with your loan number and information. And if you feel like you want to go ahead and pay it, that's great. If you want to pay it off, that's great. But if you change your mind and you paid it off, you're not going to be eligible for another loan. Once it's paid off, we're done. So be very careful about making those types of decisions.
Here's a question I've got several times, and Troy actually kind of asked this, but businesses that are actually in business, specifically maybe for a technology company that they are actually doing business, but they're basically revenue is negative. How does that show up on the application when they ask for last year's revenue, even though they may have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars as they do business, pay payroll, and those sort of things?
Well, again, we're in processing an economic injury disaster loan, we use historical information. On a normal disaster, we would be looking at a 3-year period up to the most current month. But in the streamline, we just look for whatever the sales were 12 months prior to the disaster. And if the business had negative income, their cost of goods sold exceeds the sales, then we cannot necessarily say that the problem was COVID related. Because again, we are asking for information for what happened last year before all of this craziness happened. So that's why it is important to read all those little bitty line items when you complete the application. I can't tell you how many people have put for the gross monthly sales 12 months prior to the disaster a 0, and they would be declined because we cannot say that it was economically injured. And you go, "Oh, you're crazy, lady. The whole country is affected." But you didn't show it on the application, and that's what we have to depend on. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's see. So, Janet, why don't you ask one more question, and we should probably, it's getting quite a bit late here, so we should probably wrap it up in a bit. Be mindful of Kathy's time. So what do you have for us today?
I ask Aaron's last question here. Can excess money be returned, and can the loan be paid back early without additional fees?
Okay. And the answer is yes. And I think you will see in the promissory note, it will say that it can be paid back early. Again, what I would just say is don't try to return the money until you're sure, because once you pay it back, that money is not available anymore. It's not like a revolving credit line where you can get some, pay some, get some, pay some. That's it. So make sure that if you return any money and it doesn't count as more than one payment. So let's say your payments are $200 a month and you put $1,000 down. You don't get to skip payments for 4 months. You've got to make a payment each and every month. So if you pay extra, it doesn't advance the payment due date.
Thank you. Well, Kathy, this has been great. I really appreciate you spending time with us today.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. And again, these are a one-time situation. This is a pandemic of epic proportions. These loans just got created right after the legislation was passed, and we are working with literally millions of applications. So we appreciate your patience and understanding with us. And if you need help, please reach out to the expert counselors at the Small Business Development Center throughout the state. or the SBA district office staff, or call 800-659-2955, and a customer service representative will do their very best to help you.
Thank you, Kathy. So with that, I just want to say that everyone on our call today will receive a recording of our presentation today. You'll also get the slides, and we'll try to answer some of these questions for you that we didn't get to today, and get back to you on that and send out some of those answers to everybody later on. So, Janet, you got any great last words for us?
Nope, everybody have a great week.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kathy, and everybody stay safe and have a great day today.
Thank you.